This week, I'm asking you to make your own piece of appropriation. So I want you to take images, selections really, from images, from at least 5 different images, and bring them together to create your own new image that is some kind of object. It can be a made-up object. It certainly doesn't need to be a real object, but it needs to look like an object. So we're not talking about a landscape because we're going to do something like that later on. So you need to take really good selections from a whole bunch of different images and combine them together to create this new object. So I want to talk about the select and mask option in Photoshop because now that you guys have learned all these different selection tools and how you can even change the option for the selection tools in the option bar, now we can talk about some ways that we can refine those selections. So although you saw in a lot of those past student examples, people tend to use objects like a bike or a rocket or binoculars, I'm going to do these examples on a person, and I will do one on a rocket as well. So what we want, I'm going to take as my goal is to select her lips. And the tool that I'm going to use is going to be the quick selection tool. So I need to, first of all, make sure I'm in the right mode. I was currently in the takeaway mode, which I definitely don't want. I'm going to go into just the new selection mode. And I want to make sure I'm really zoomed in to start with. Close that up. Take that tool again. And I want the brush to be the size of the area I'm trying to select. So I don't want it to be larger because then it's going to try to take too much. So I'm just going to hold my cursor down and go and do a selection around the lips. And it's not bad, but you can see it's certainly not very smooth along the edges. Now to get rid of the inside, I'm going to switch my tool to the takeaway, make my brush even smaller, and remember to use those left and right bracket keys, square bracket keys on your keyboard. That's the keyboard shortcut to be able to change the diameter of your brush. Okay, so again, it's not bad, but it's certainly not smooth. Now, with this selection still active, I'm going to go back up to my options bar and choose the Select and Mask button. And what pops up here are some more options for refining my selection, which is pretty cool. First, I have mine to view it with a white background. Yours might be what's the onion skin. You can choose all these different kinds of backgrounds just to help you get a little bit of contrast as you're working on your selection. I like personally the white one. It helps me, it gives me, in this image at least, enough contrast that I can see my selection. After you've chosen what kind of background you want to have, you can choose the opacity of that background. So if it's very low opacity, I barely see it. If it's completely opaque, then the rest of my background gets blocked off. And this is all just a temporary view that allows you to be able to focus on your selection. So this white that I'm adding and the opacity I'm changing is not going to be permanent. It's going to go away as soon as I click OK or cancel. So what I wanted to point out, I think I'm going to put my opacity at about 40%, that's fine, are these options down here, global refinements. And what we're going to use in this one to sort of smooth out the edges of the lip, it's going to be the smooth option. So watch what happens. I'm just going to scroll this number up, and you see how the edges here are now really soft. I'll just put that back to, so I was at 56, put it back to 0, and you can see how rough the edges are. Even the inside of the mouth, I'm going to scroll that back up until I went back up to 56, and now I get the full lip. I did lose a little bit of my selection in the mouth, but I can go back and I can erase that. I can touch that up. Feather I'm going to talk about more in another video, but feather basically adds a softening to the edges, and it does so by taking a little bit outside your selection, and that's not what I want here, so I'm not going to use that one. Shift edge I'm going to talk about when I grab her finger, but I'll move it to the left here and see if you can see the difference. So you see what's happening here whether I move it to the left or I move it to the right. If I move it to the right, it is shifting the edge of my selection and it's actually taking more than I originally selected. If I move it to the left, it's cutting into my selection and it's taking less. So again, I don't think I really need to adjust that for this particular image. I'll try to just get that back to 0. it was really all I needed for this one was the smooth. And now I'm going to click OK. And here's my active selection. And I'm going to do my keyboard shortcut Control J, which is just the copy and paste all in one command. And I'll turn off the original. And there we can see a pretty good selection. I want to just touch this up, and I am going to do this with the eraser tool. I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to take my eraser tool, make the brush super, super tiny. I just want to go in and touch up those little bits of black that were brought back once I smoothed out my selection. So that's using the smooth option with that tool. And now I'm going to move this guy out, move that selection out. We'll put it over here, go back to my main layer, and this time I'm going to grab the finger. I can zoom out a little bit, and we'll use another one of those options. So I'm going to take the finger and I'm going to use the polygonal, and on purpose I'm going to take my selection and let it be a little bit larger than I actually want it to be. And then we're going to do that shift option. Just try to go around quickly here. So it's certainly not a perfect selection. I'm just going to go up to the top and close it. All right, now I'm going to do the same thing. Make sure you are on your background layer. If I'm on layer 2, nothing will show up. So I'm on my background layer. I'm going to go back up to select and mask. And I'm pretty okay with the settings I still have up here. So this time I'm going to shift the edge, and I'm shifting it to the left. You can see as I shift it to the right how it takes more, and as I shift it to the left it is cutting in to my selection, and then I can smooth it out. Now I am zoomed way in, so that little pixelation is because I'm looking at it at 300%. When you look at this at 100%, it's going to look like a really good selection. Okay, so now I've shifted the edge to the left, so that way it brought it in because my original selection wasn't perfect. I had a little bit of my background, or really her head, and then I've smoothed it down to the point where I no longer see any of the black or rough edges, and hit OK. And then same thing, Control J, and let's put this out on its own layer and take a look at it. And that looks pretty good. So when I'm looking at your projects, I think I've mentioned this before in other videos, if you have just like a solid white background, I'll create a new layer and put that below and make that a solid white background. Often your selections look really good if your image that you were trying to select was solid white, for example. So I go into your image and I'll add a color, like maybe a red, so that I can really look at the edges of your selection, because you don't want to assume that the background color that you have will always be the background color of the image that you were selecting from. So in other words, even though it might blend in if you get a little of your background, you want to make sure it really is gone and that you're using non-destructive methods as much as possible. Okay, lastly, I want to talk about that feather. So let's say over here I have a rocket, and I'm going to do kind of the same steps. I'm going to take my quick selection tool and I'm going to move around and try to get, I want to get a little bit more of it down here. Let's go up to the top. Okay, so that's pretty good. And so now I'm going to go up to select and mask. And what I am not crazy about is this hard edge here. So I could smooth it, but that's not going to really help the hard edge. It's just going to make it smoother. So in this case, what I want to do is I want to add the feather. So I'm going to give it a little bit of feather, and you see how that hard edge is softening? So what a feather does is it literally takes the edge of your selection, I'll just put it back down to 0, and depending on the number that you've added for your feather, it's going to take that many extra pixels. So let's say if I have a feather of 5, it took 5 pixels outside of the edge of my selection, but each pixel slowly goes down in opacity. So it creates this like really nice soft gradient. And it does the same thing for the inside of your selection. So again, if my feather at 5, it finds the line of my selection and it fades in 5 pixels in from my selection. So in and out, and that's how you get this like softening effect. All right, so again, this was before the feather. That doesn't look natural, doesn't look like, you know, the fire jets and the gas and everything. So I add a little bit of feather, maybe go up, you know, to 10, something like that. And now that's going to give me a lot softer selection there. So I hit OK. I was okay with the rest of it. And same thing, I can copy. Now this one I'm going to go into another document, so I'm going to just copy this. And I'm going to go over to this one and paste it in. And let's zoom out and take a look here. All right, so I don't know exactly where I'm going with this. I could try to make some sort of odd object. But the point is you can see that this part here looks pretty good. I don't have any hard edges. Looks like a pretty good selection. All right, so that's it for this video. And the next ones, I'm going to also go more over the transform tools, and then we're going to talk about quick mask selections.